Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and today is part 2 of the change log history, in which we are going to show you how to create a history for in a specific cell and then undo those changes for a specific cell. So let's get started. All right, well, thank you very much for joining me today. And in part 1 of the change log video we had last week, where we created a log of all changes and all transactions, where we would make a change and then we would see those changes over at the bottom of our change log list, as well as we also had a login, logout history within the log table. But in today's video, part 2 of the change log, what I would like to do is I would like to record changes on a per cell basis. I would also like to add a sheet in here as well, in which we did not have in the last video. And I would also want to track those changes and revert to changes based on a specific cell so that we could easily undo those changes with a simple click, just like that. And we're going to show you how we did that. Add the ability to right click on any cell, and you can see if there is a cell, if there's no change history, nothing would appear. But if there is a change history, we will see the list of history of those changes, and that's specific to that actual cell that we have right clicked on. So let's go ahead and show you how we did that. And first, we're going to start off with the changes that we made from the last video, and that would be adding the sheet first. So let's go ahead and see how we did that. Into the VBA code we have under the Developers tab, you can select Visual Basic. Alt F11 will get you there. If you don't have the Developers tab open, you can find that over in the options under the Customize ribbon and make sure you have Developers selected there. So let's go ahead and get into it. Go ahead and Visual Basic, and let's go ahead and take a look at this. We're going to go through the changelog max, and we've had these macros before, but I have added just a few lines of code. In fact, I've shifted the columns and added a new column where we have active sheet name. This is the only change from last week. If you have not seen last week's video, I'll make sure to include a link in the description so you can view that before. And basically what we've done is in column G, I've added active sheet name. And this allows you to use multiple sheets with the changelog, in which we did not have previously. So I've gone ahead and added that in. For column G, we now have a sheet name. And this is going to be very important also for when we do filter by cell, because we also need to filter by sheet. And I'll show you that as well. Nothing else has changed in this particular macros here. We have the ability to log and show a password, undo a log as well. So we do have that ability. So I will go ahead and make sure that's available to you. Most of all, let's go ahead and delete that. We don't need that particular module. I've have everything you need for the new changes in part 2 under the right click menu. Okay, so let's go over the methodology here of what we want to happen. The idea is that when we make a change to a cell, okay, let's take a look at this. There's no change history right on this particular cell. So if we change that to 100, we make another change to 200, and we make a change to 300 again, I want to show 3 specific changes for that. On right click, I want to show the ability to revert back to any specific simply by clicking on that using right click functionality. We've added this cell change history button, as well as the drop down on hover as the ability to add 3 different buttons. So when we select one, it reverts back to what we have had original. And this is a great feature because the undo itself in Excel, of course, after you run macros, that undo history cannot be used. And of course, when you open and close the workbook, there is no undo. But this particular change history, regardless of who's using it, regardless of how long, it's going to always be tracked in Excel, and that's a really powerful feature because we do want to know, especially with accounting applications, what types of changes were made, who made them, and when they were made, and if we have the ability to go back or simply quickly see those changes based on a cell. Let's go ahead and see how we did that. Back into VBA. We do have some on-sheet macros here. And what we've done is we're going to say we want to be able to right click. The idea is that when we go to another sheet, right, and we right click, we don't need that. We don't want that right click to appear, right? We only want it to appear when we click on the specific sheet that we have located. So you see we have cell change history here, except when we go to a setup screen or when we go to another, we right click and that is missing, which is exactly what we want. We don't want a change history only on the sheets that we have allowed it. And to do that, we've created two macros. And let's go ahead and go into the right click menu and go over those macros. So I have one macro that says get cell to history, and that's going to show us how we get the history for that cell. We have a right click call, and what this macro is going to do is basically it's going to add, it's going to create those menus and sub menus. And then we have another macro called right click cancel, and this is going to basically delete the menu because it's important. We don't want it here, but we do want it here. So we have to actually delete it from when we don't want it, and we have to create it when we do want it. And that's how VBA handles those right click. And then also we created 5 different macros, and we don't need this one. We've created 5 different macros, and those are basically simply that allows us to revert back to a specific change. So when we right click, we want to create one macro here, one macro here. So basically what I want, if I click this last button here, I want whatever is in the cell now, I want it to change back to 237, right? So when we click that, it changes back to 237. Or if we click 400 to 500, this change, I want it back to 400. So that quickly allows us. So those are 5 different macros here, and I'll go over them. They're very simple. As you can see, they're just one line of code. So let's go ahead and pull up let's start with the right click call. Let's create this menu. Let me show you how we go ahead and we create this. First, we have one button, which is the main button, and we have 5 different sub buttons here. So let's go ahead and show you how we create those. In this, we're going to dimension a C button, number 1, as the command. That's a pop-up, okay? Command bar pop-up. This is the pop-up right here, right? That would be the first one right here. This is the pop-up, C button 1 right here, cell change history. So that's the first one we're going to create. So with the application, command bar cell, right? We want to create, first we're going to delete it. We always want to delete it first. Otherwise, if we don't include that line, right? If we comment that out, every time we right click, it's going to add a new one and add a new one, and it's going to keep adding and adding and adding. So we always want to delete whatever we have, and that helps us refresh it too. So we delete what we have, and then we add a new one. And that's kind of common through Excel, deleting often, especially with like pop-up comments, and certain things with Excel, like conditional formatting, when you go through VBA, we often delete it and then recreate it. So in this case as well, we're deleting it. And basically, we're going to say add. We want it before. We want that to show up on the list first, right? So before whatever is listed on our right click, we want to add it before number 1. So when we right click, we want it right up at the top here. So that's where I want to place it. And it's going to be a pop-up. Okay, this means it's going to be a pop-up, meaning that it's going to be a main, and we want other pop-up menu items based on that. So that is the type, this is the location, and this is a specific one. So we're just defining this. Okay, we're defining a C button, and now we're going to say with this same button, the first one, we want to give it a name, a caption, cell change history. So you saw that already. So that's all we're going to do with that. It's very, very, very simple. That's all. That's all we need to create this first one right here. Now we're going to move into the code for these five. And And let's go ahead and go into that. So what the rest of this code does is it creates those 5 different buttons. And what I want to do here is I want to stop right here, and we're going to come back to this. We're going to revisit this. But what I want to show you what's going on in the background, and that's this macro right here, get cell history, because I'll show you why. When we go into transactions and we click on this macro here, let's take a look at this here. We have this set on before right click. Right? So before right click cancel. This is going to delete it. This is going to get the history. We want the history based on that cell, and this is going to call it. So that's the order. First, we delete any remaining menus. 2, we get the history, right? Because what I want is I want the history of this particular cell only. Only this history, only cell I-24. So I want to go over that macro, how we get that history, and we're going to go over that right here. And then the next one is the macro we were just on, which is going to call. So let's go ahead and dive into the get cell history. And basically what this macro is going to do is and I'll show you how it's going to take this list starting from the header row. It's going to take it all the way to the last row. Right? It's going to provide an advanced filter. And let's zoom out a little bit. Going to do an advanced filter, and then what it's going to do is going to say, okay, I want to filter, but I want to filter it based on this sheet, and I want to filter it based on this cell only. Okay, so that's what I want to do. Then I want to create a filter. Okay, then after that filter is done, what I want to do is if I just run the filter, it's going to be based on the order. So the order is basically, if you look at here, earliest 1154 to later, right? Early to later. But if you look right here on right click, I want the newest version here and the oldest here. So when we do the advanced filter, we're in the wrong order, right? I want the newest to appear here, the oldest to appear here. But when we run that advanced filter, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to put the oldest value here and the newest here. So what I want to do is I want to run a sort, and I want to sort these. These are the results. These are the results on our advanced filter. So I want to resort this list based on the newest time here and the oldest time here. You see how it is here, 12:01 p.m., 10:20 a.m. So I want to run that sort just like this. And so we're going to run the sort. So that's the next choice. And then what I want to do is I want to take the first 5 or the last 5, the most recent 5 changes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I want to use those. And I want to use this user, I want to use the previous value, and I want to use the updated value. So those 3 things, user, previous value, updated value, and I want to put those inside the right click. Again, cell change history, user, previous value, new value. User, previous value, new value. So that's how we get that. So I want all that information in our buttons. So let's go ahead and dive into the macro that actually is doing that. Now that you know what a high level is, now let's dive in and see how the macro performs that. So right click, cell history. That's the name of the macro. And we're going to dimension 2 strings. One is the active cell that we're on. We need to know the cell address, and we need to know the sheet. The reason is we need to know those. We need to put those right here. I need to place the sheet right here, and I need to place the cell address right here, because then we're going to run our advanced filter based on these 2 items. And that way, the results only show results based on those 2 items. So that's why we need those. And we also need the last row. When I run my filter, I need to know what the last row of our original data, in this case it's 36, but it grows. Every change we make, it grows. So when we run our advanced filter, I need to run all the way, all this data right to here. So we need to know that last row. So that's why I've dimensioned last row is long. And we're going to use application screen updating false. This helps the screen from making some strange looks, and then we will, once the macro is finished, we'll make it true again. So let's go ahead and say the active cell is the active cell address. So that means when we right click on this one, we know the active cell is I-24. So the active cell is the one that we're currently on, and the active sheet is the sheet name that we're on. So now we can say with sheet 3. Now sheet 3 is our change log. Sheet 3 is our change log. That's the one we're working with. So that's the one we're going to do all the work in. First, we need to clear any contents. I need to clear, let's spell that right. I need to clear any previous values because I want to make sure that we get a clean slate. And what that means is this. When we go into the change log, here I want to clear this out. In our cases, we're only going to be using these two fields, but it's good practice to clear any and all filters out. I always like to clear this whole row, and I want to clear all the data, any data that's here. I want to clear that because our advanced filter is going to put new data in there. So I want to make sure any of the old data is clear. So we're going to do that. So we do that, which is AA2 through AG2, right? That's that filter. And then the results are here, AA3 to AG999. Okay, so that will help us clear. So we just want to make sure we clear out any previous filters. Then what we want to do is we want to place our filter, the active sheet and the active cell. We want to place those in AD2 and AE2. Again, we want to place in AD2, we want to place our sheet name. In AE2, we want to place our cell address. So that's all we're doing there. We're defining the last row. We went over that. The last row is in our main data here. That's how we get our last row using this line of code, D999 end xlup.row. That'll give us our last row. Then we have to run our advanced filter. And the advanced filter is exactly what I went through with you. And so basically we're going to take the original data here. This is the original data, D4 through J. And remember, make sure you're going to include those headers. D4, it's got to include those headers. All the way to the last row, J, and then the last row here. So make sure to include those headers. That's a critical part of it. D4 through J, and we're going to run an advanced filter. Now, we're going to copy this. We want to copy it to another location. So we're going to use XL filter copy. We don't want to filter in place. We want a new location. And now, what is the criteria? The criteria also must include the headers and the filter. So our criteria is AA1 through AG2. And advanced filters is one of the most powerful things you can learn. Make sure also that these header names here match exactly these headers name here. Okay? If there's any slight change or differentiation between those two headers, you will get a bug. And it's pretty normal. So you just want to make sure, I usually just copy and paste the values right here. You want to make sure they're always the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, here's our advanced filter. Filter from AA1 through AG2. And then put the results in AA3 through AG3. So that is our next part. So here's our criteria, and then copy to range here, AA3 to AG3. And then we're going to make sure those advanced filter results, we do want unique values, and we want that to be true. So that covers it. What that's going to do is put all the data there, except it's not sorted yet. So that next step is we do want to sort the data. So first we're going to clear any possible sorts that may be on the sheets. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sort the fields. We're going to sort it based on AA4. That's the header here. Okay, that's the first line of code. Line AA4. We want to sort it. This is our first row. So that's the one we want to sort. We're going to base it on the date and time. And then we want to sort on the values, which is correct. And we want to sort descending, all right? Descending. I want to make sure that that is descending. So that's very, very important. And then we also want to sort normal. Sort normal. So that is going to run the sort, and that's going to say, well, this is what we're sorting here. And now we're going to say with sort, and then we're going to define the range. Okay, and in this instance, AA4 through AG, and then I've defined the last row here. using AA999, this is the last row. So that'll close our range to the complete range of what we want to sort. We're not putting it, we don't have headers in there because we're using AA4, which is the first row of data. So headers is no. We don't need to match the case. Orientation would be top to bottom. And then sort pin method XL pin, that's okay. And then we're going to apply the sort. So that's it for the sorting. And then we're going to run through. So that's going to get our data sorted properly from the earliest, right? All the way to, the latest to the oldest right here. So that's how it's going to work in that case. So then, now we know that an AF4 is going to be the first, AF5 is going to be the second. So this is the right order in the way that we've changed it. So let's go ahead and change, let's go I24. I just want to show you a change. Okay, I24, let's change this to 999, okay? And now we're going to right click on it, which is going to run all that code, and you see 400 to 999. So let's go ahead and take a look on the change log. Now you see it's added one row up here, the change we just made. It was 400, now it's 999. You see how that added it? So that macro just ran. This macro just ran, and it updated all those values just as we said. Now there's a lot of changes, but I've limited it to 5. You can create almost as many as you want. So I've set it at 5, but you can do a lot more if you want. So now that you know how that advanced filter, now let's go back into the macro, which is the right click call. If you remember, we stopped right here, and now we're going to say, now you understand. Now what I'm saying is I put an if then for each button. What I don't want to happen is if there's no values here, let me delete that and watch what happens here. If there's no values here, I don't want the right click to show up, right? Right click. Look, I only want, let's run that again. Right click. I only want, oh, it's gonna keep going. I'd have to delete the original log because it's gonna keep filling up even if I delete it here. But the bottom line is, let's choose another cell that we haven't made those changes on. Let's go ahead here, and you see I don't want any changes to show up. I don't want, if there's no history, I don't want it to show up. I only want, if there's only one change, I only want one change to show up. Okay, I don't want 5 blank ones to show up. I only want the one that showed up. So we do that with an if then statement. So you can see there's only one line of data here. So what I'm going to run is going to say if AF and the row is blank, then don't create the button. If this is blank, don't create the button. Same. So we've gone through if statements. We don't want that button created. So when we look back on the macro, they all start with an if statement. If AF4 does not equal empty, then continue with creating that button. Otherwise, don't create it. So in this instance, we only have one row, AF4. AF5, AF6 are all blank. So when we right click, it just creates one button. So that's what I want to do. I don't want to create buttons if there's no data that exists. So we go through each one of these. Now with this pop-up, we're saying with controls, and we've created a control button here. We've added a caption here. Now what is that caption? Let's take a look at that. The caption is variable or dynamic. First of all, it says the person's name, in that case my name. It says changed the original value to the updated value. So there's 3 variables: name, original value, and updated value. And we know that data is here: name, original value, updated value. So we can pull those. So with the name, I've created a dynamic button range to do that. And all we've done is here, the caption is sheet 3 AB4. AB4 is the username. And then the words changed. Then we have the value, AF, that's the original value. And I've wrapped this in a currency. You may not want to do this. If your data is not a currency, if it's text or something, you may not want to create that. So you may want to not include a currency, or you may have a different format since we're working with currencies in this one. So, but you may or may not want to create a format that's currency. So we've added the format on both of the from value and the to value. And so also we've given it a face ID, and this face ID is the icon. And I'll go ahead and go over and show you how to get those face IDs. But basically what we've done is I've added an add-in here that helps us with that. And let's go ahead and go into View and Toolbars. And we have a Face ID browser, and I'll give you a link to make sure how you get this. And basically this is a program, and so this is a Face ID browser. So if you hover over it, you'll see it has a Face ID number, and that's how, and there's so many of them, right? So basically what I did is I found the one that was undo, and then I was able to locate that. There's not so many on this particular one, but so here's the undo, 4353. So I've used this one, 4353. That's the Face ID browser. And I think I have included a link on here. Let's just check. If not, I'll make sure to include it. Oh, here it is. I do have it here in the setup screen. So to get that program, just go to this link here. That'll get you that add-in so that you can use the Face ID browser. And basically to get that icon, to get this icon here, right, you'll need to know the number of this. And so in this case, it's 4353. So I've added that number. We'll close this. I've added that number right here, Face ID 4353. And then what we say is on action. On action, we want to run a macro. I want to run a macro. And basically the macro is going to be this workbook, right? This macro, and then revert 1. And that macro is down here. So the macro says active cell value equals sheet 3 AF4. So all we're saying is take the active cell value, let's say 247, and I want to change it to this value right here. So if we click on I-35 again, right? If we click on this, it's going to say that AF4 is 104, right? So when we click on that, it's going to change it right back to 104. Right back to 104, AF4. So that is all that macro does here. Active cell equals sheet 3 AF4 value. And then for the next rows, for number 2, it's going to go 5, 6, 7. So basically it's going to run down. Now you can create as many of these as you want. I've done 5. You may want to do 3. You may want to do 10. So again, with the number 2, in this case, we're doing a test. If AF6 or AF5 is empty, don't do anything. If it's not empty, again, add a caption. In this case, we're using row 5. Remember, row 5 is the information that we need to add. So we want to do that. So we've gone ahead and wrapped those in an if statement to make sure that there is a value. We've used the same Face ID icon, the undo icon. We're changing the macro. The only thing that changed the macro, we're adding 3 because we have 5 different macros, each with just 1 line of code. So that is pretty much it with how we take care of add the right click and add the functionality. The next macro is a cancel, and this is important for when, as I described, we don't want right click to show up on other pages. We don't want it here. So we need to make sure that we cancel that when changing sheets or performing certain actions. So our right click cancel basically says with the command bar's cell history change, with any button this name, delete it. So that when if we go to, let's go to transactions. So that when we deactivate the worksheet, that means when we go to another, we're going to run that macro, which deletes it. And when we activate the worksheet, we're going to call it up, right? We want to know it. We want that back on. So when we're inside the worksheet, it's here. When we're outside the worksheet, it's not here. So that's basically how we deactivate it and activate it based on the worksheet movements. We also don't want that when we click another workbook. We don't want that. So when we deactivate the workbook, we also don't want it in another workbook. So for example, if I'm here and I click new workbook, I don't want that right click here also. So I want to make sure that it's deactivated or deleted when we click a new workbook as well. So therefore, when when we have workbook deactivated, it cancels it as well. And I think I've added it to close too. When we close the workbook, I also want it. So I've added this macro here, the same macro on close. And when we open it, we don't need when we open it, because when we open it or we activate the workbook, it's going to say if the sheet name is transactions, then we're going to right click call. But if we're not on the transaction, then cancel it. So that's a little bit of if then statement that makes sure that we have that right click functionality on the sheet that we need. So that is how we add right click functionality. That's how we add undo on a specific cell. And that's also how we're able to track changes per cell, which can be extremely powerful, especially for accounting type programs where you need that kind of history and you need to track. I hope this training has been good for you. Thank you so much for joining me. Please share this video and like it. Thanks so much and have a great one.